Hello, I'm Bret, and you're watching The Defining Moment for Creating the Culture of Conscience. Our guest today is Laurel Rapp. Laurel is the International Education Program Manager with OneVoice in New York. OneVoice is a grassroots movement working to end the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians in the Middle East. Laurel was born in Providence, Rhode Island, and raised in New Jersey. In 2006, she earned her Bachelor of Arts degree in International Relations from Brown University. She's lived in France, Switzerland, and Morocco. Laurel Rapp, welcome to The Defining Moment. It's really a pleasure for me to welcome you here to our studio today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for coming. Our topic today is OneVoice, a movement for ending the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. And I'd like to begin by asking you to share a defining moment from your own life.
A few years ago, I was just about to embark on a very exciting journey. I had recently received a scholarship to study in Morocco, to do research and study in Morocco for a year, and serve as a cultural ambassador to bring my American culture to Morocco and then to bring Moroccan culture back to the US. And my defining moment happened over the course of 1 week, just before my departure and just after my arrival in Morocco. I just graduated from university. I'd studied the Middle East and North Africa a lot about Islam as well, and also really followed current events in the United States and realized that going to the Middle East might not be something that a lot of Americans would be supportive of or would understand why I would want to do something like this. And just a few days before going, I was speaking to many friends and relatives and people that I knew and people that I didn't know either, telling them that I was going to Morocco. One man said, well, you know, have a great time at the casinos. I wish you luck. I said, no, not Monaco. It's Morocco, different country. But I heard a lot of really troubling things. People, you know, making comments that were very ignorant, just a lack of understanding about the culture, about the politics, about the religion, and they really bothered me. When I went to Morocco, the first few days I was there, the same exact thing happened, but on the other, reversed. I would walk down the street, and the minute someone found out I was American, they'd have many questions, very pointed, sometimes bitter questions about what it is like to be an American, questions about our foreign policy, questions about our president, and it was that week I drew a conclusion. The conclusion was that Americans and people from the Middle East, and particularly Morocco, know very little about the other culture. They read newspapers, they watch TV shows, they watch movies, and they're caricatures. Both sides produce caricatures of the other, inciting fear in the other. And what the kind of upside of the story was that after this week of really difficult questions, I had the chance to speak to these people again during my time in Morocco, and then once I returned to the United States and was able to share some of the experiences that I had and really reframe a lot of the misconceptions that they had about both sides. And once they saw a much more human vision of both sides, their fears were really assuaged and their curiosity was really piqued in learning more. So I think this moment, this week, really has defined what I do now with OneVoice in creating greater awareness on both sides and reframing existing prejudices that do exist.
Okay, very clear. Thank you so much for sharing that. How did you get involved with OneVoice?
Following my year in Morocco, I returned to the United States, and I'd had some really interesting experiences in the Middle East, traveling to Jordan and Palestine, Israel and Egypt, and speaking to young people there, people my age. And so frequently what they would speak about was the conflict, conflict in their own societies, but also conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. And for a place like Morocco, this was sometimes hard for me to understand at first because geographically these two regions are so separated by thousands of miles. and Morocco doesn't suffer from a lot of the negative repercussions of the conflict like some of the other, like Israel and Palestine, and like some other neighboring countries of that region. But it just became very clear to me that this is something that matters to so many people. And even coming back to the United States and speaking with people here, the conflict is something that everyone is thinking about, whether we have ethnic ties to the conflict or not. So I came back and I knew I wanted to do something with this conflict, and I was introduced to OneVoice by a former colleague of mine who said, "This is a great movement, you should really look into it further." I really liked the model that they work with. I think it's a very realistic, pragmatic model of two parallel movements who come to the organization for very different reasons, but are ultimately working towards the same goal of ending the conflict. So after I returned from Morocco, I began working for OneVoice with North America University Outreach.
Okay, very good. Well, tell us more about the scope of OneVoice. How large is the movement, and what kind of support are you receiving?
OneVoice is a very broad-based grassroots movement that exists in Israel and Palestine and increasingly around the world. We started in 2002, which was the height of the Second Intifada. The Intifada was a period of uprising and violence on both sides. We were founded in this period of hopelessness as an alternative, as a way to have each of us ask ourselves what we are willing to do and take very personal responsibility in working to reframe the existing reality, which was not a very pretty one. OneVoice counts about 650,000 signatories to our mandate, many of whom are very much involved with the OneVoice movement as youth leaders, as community members who are continuing to do this very important work of preparing communities on both sides to put pressure on their leadership and to prepare for an end to conflict. We have about 3,100 youth leaders that have been trained on both sides, and we are growing every day. OneVoice is happy to receive support from people from all over, from all aspects of society. We are a broad-based grassroots movement, and we are trying to build a very representative constituency to reach out to all stakeholders. So we have reached out to young people and old people. We have many religious people from all religious faiths, from the three major religious faiths that exist in Israel and Palestine. We also work with political leaders. We have support from King Abdullah of Jordan. We have support from many different American political figures like Dennis Ross, Ambassador Ross. In Palestine, we work with people such as Mahmoud Abbas, the president, as Saeb Erekat, the chief Palestinian negotiator. On the Israeli side, we work with many, many different members of Knesset, which is the Israeli parliament, Ephraim Snei, among many others.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. What is unique about the vision of OneVoice in promoting peace and reconciliation between Jews and Palestinians?
OneVoice takes a very pragmatic approach. Israelis and Palestinians have been going through this conflict for over 60 years now. And a lot of animosity has built on both sides, a lot of bad blood, a lot of hatred. And it's the way that we're working to address this and to create this coexistence that we hope will come very soon is to work towards a much more immediate goal, which is an end to conflict. And what we're hoping to do is to create this great group of grassroots supporters on both sides to empower their leadership to sit down and continue sitting down at the negotiation table with a greater knowledge that their people are behind them. So it's not going to be the leadership betraying their people if they come back with an agreement. It's that their leadership will be betraying them if they don't come back with an agreement, and that's what we're working to do.
Okay, very clear. Thank you so much. What are some of the main goals and objectives of OneVoice?
OneVoice is working to demonstrate that there are partners for peace on both sides. So frequently you'll find that Israelis will identify within their community as being very committed to ending the conflict, but will say, well, there's no partner on the Palestinian side that's willing to work with us, and how can we resolve the conflict if there is no Palestinian partner? And on the Palestinian side, you'll hear a very similar thing. Palestinians are very committed. Palestinians want their own state, but it's the Israelis that will never allow the Palestinians this goal, this vision for statehood. What we're working to address is to combat that misperception. There is a misperception on both sides that partners do not exist. So we're doing many different campaigns to build trust, to show that there are partners for peace, by having Israelis and Palestinians sign joint language, by holding joint town hall meetings in East Jerusalem that Israelis and Palestinians can come to together. So we really are working to challenge existing misperceptions that exist in Israel and Palestine, and also attack some of the most intransigent, the most difficult issues that exist right now. The final status issues are something that have dogged peace negotiations for 40 to 60 years now. These are the issues of Jerusalem and refugees and borders and settlements and the security barrier. The list goes on. What we're working to do is to challenge a lot of the taboos that exist in Israeli and Palestinian society in dealing with these issues, because until society is prepared to accept a resolution, the leadership will have no power to be able to enact it. So in Israel, for example, speaking about Jerusalem and dividing it is a very taboo issue. Just a few months ago, when Olmert raised this issue in Knesset, many members of Knesset walked out because they didn't even want to hear it. But for the Palestinians, having East Jerusalem as their capital, as the third most holy place for Muslims to go and pray in, and for Christians, and for Jews, this is something that is so essential to them as Palestinians, and this is something that will ultimately and most likely be included in any peace agreement. On the Palestinian side, speaking about the refugees and the right of return is something that is very taboo to speak about, and it's very politically sensitive and unpopular. So we're beginning these conversations on both sides to challenge these issues and to begin a much more internal process of preparing each individual to work to accepting what will come out of these final status negotiations.
Okay, very interesting. Why has the will of the majority for peaceful coexistence been insufficient in stopping extremists who are bent on resorting to violence and bloodshed at any cost?
Mm-hmm. Well, in any society, you'll find that the people who scream the loudest are heard the loudest. People that use the most extreme acts, violent acts, are heard the loudest. That exists here in the United States and very much so in Israel and Palestine. But what's interesting is that although these people are heard the loudest, they're actually a very small minority in Israel and Palestine. What we're working to do is to work with this silent majority. There are many, many thousands, millions on both sides that are committed to joint principles. They're committed to an end to conflict, committed to an end to violence, committed to this creation of an independent Palestinian state that lives in peace next to a secure Israel. And we're working to reframe the fact that these extremists are able to hijack, to speak on behalf of all Israelis, to speak on behalf of all Palestinians. We're building this human infrastructure of moderate majority on both sides to reject violent acts, to reject acts that incite the other side, to reject acts that are antithetical to progress and antithetical to an end to conflict.
Okay. How does OneVoice go about finding common ground between Jews and Palestinians? Mm-hmm. And how do you deal with extremists on both sides?
Mm-hmm. We're working to highlight common ground that already exists between Israelis and Palestinians, and also working to build greater common ground that doesn't yet exist. As I was saying before, there is a perception that Israelis and Palestinians are completely, they're monolithic, identities, everyone feels the same way, and one group hates another group. This is not the reality, and OneVoice is working to provide a different reality. When we were founded in 2002, we did a series of surveys of about 140,000 Israelis and Palestinians from all over: Israel, West Bank, Gaza, the refugee communities from the kibbutzim, the collective Jewish villages across Israel, from the urban centers, from the rural areas, trying to get a very broad representative cross-sample of Israeli and Palestinian society. And we did find that consensus doesn't yet exist on all of these issues. I don't have to tell you that. But what we did find was that there is a very significant point of overlap between both of these groups. Groups, as I said, are committed to an end to conflict, which for Israelis and Palestinians is generally quite obvious. But to us who live outside of the region and read newspapers and watch television, watch the news, this might be surprising to us to hear that the vast majority are committed to an end to conflict, just want to live in peace and security, have jobs, prosper on both sides, and have their own states. OneVoice believes that extremism, violent extremism, is somebody that denies the humanity of the other side and will oftentimes resort to violence to achieve these objectives. And what we're working to do is to sideline these minority elements in Israeli and Palestinian society, to build this human infrastructure of young leaders who are committed to these goals and will reject within their own society these people that seek to derail the process. We don't think of this group as a self-contained group. No one will ever enter, no one will ever leave. Extremism is, I think, an ill that maybe affects all of us a little bit. We might all have a little piece of extreme thought in our own heads, but what we're working to do is to tamp that down and to create a much more positive way of engaging in the process. And we're looking to do that in Israel and in Palestine.
Okay, very good. You've mentioned human infrastructure a couple of times. Mm-hmm. Tell us more about human infrastructure and how you go about building that.
Building human infrastructure is the greatest bulwark against extremism. OneVoice is working to build this human infrastructure among our 3,100 and growing youth leaders in Israel and Palestine in roughly equal numbers on both sides. We believe that giving skills, training, and providing tools for these young people, they will then be able to translate this into action, into identifying challenges that exist in their local community, as well as the challenges that exist within their own societies, to design initiatives to begin to address a lot of the challenges that both societies face. Now, Israeli and Palestinians face very specific sets of challenges, very different, unique challenges on both sides. And we do work in very different ways to address those challenges on both sides. Something that's been so great is to see our youth leaders in Israel and Palestine, and actually around the world. We're working to develop a very broad-based, very geographically diverse group of young leaders. In North America, we have a very growing, wonderful group of youth leaders. And all of these people are finding very creative ways, be it through media, be it through art, be it through awareness raising or educational programs or film festivals, any way that we can begin to address the local challenges. We will then be able to take it up a level and begin to address some of the big challenges that exist on both sides.
Okay, very clear, thank you. What role do we as Americans have in working for peace in the Middle East?
I think sometimes it's really overwhelming for us as Americans to think about our role to play. We identify so many challenges that exist in the Middle East right now that are preventing peace, that are preventing ending conflict, be them in Afghanistan or Iraq or Israel and Palestine, it just seems sometimes really overwhelming for us that we can't begin to take a first step. I think something that's really important to think about is that this conflict affects all of us. What I've found in traveling around the United States, in speaking with students, many of whom have ethnic ties to the conflict, but many of whom do not, who believe in a shared humanity, who believe that we all have a role to play in creating a better future for all of us. These are some of the students that I've been meeting, and they work for those reasons. But then there are even other very pragmatic reasons why we as Americans should care. Our foreign policy is very wrapped up in this conflict, very wrapped up in the Middle East. The financing of it isn't the best way to measure, but it's one way to measure, and a lot of financing is going to working to resolve the conflict, but so far it hasn't been working. So I think we all have to work within our own communities in identifying initiatives that are meaningful for us. I think that something that's really meaningful is to begin a dialogue, to sit down with somebody that you don't know much about, someone that you might have preconceived notions about, or fears about, or apprehensions about, and just begin a conversation, because I'm sure you'll be quite surprised by what you find out. We're one of the most powerful countries in the world, and we have the ability to affect many situations in positive or negative ways. We also have the opportunity to be part of the solution, to continue to support our government in calling for a continuation of the peace process, and continuing to support the work that Israelis and Palestinians are doing in their own societies to affect this positive change.
Okay, and what view does OneVoice have toward Hamas?
OneVoice believes that we should engage all stakeholders that are committed to an end to conflict, an end to violence, and the creation of an independent Palestinian state that lives securely next to Israel. We have many different youth leaders that have many different political opinions, some of whom voted for Hamas, some of whom voted for Fatah, some of whom voted for neither, who don't think that either political party speaks to their goals and to their aspirations. OneVoice believes very much in the democratic process. Hamas was elected in generally quite free and fair elections several years ago, and this was the will of the people. The Palestinian people had spoken. Something that's very important to remember about these elections is that not all Palestinians voted on the foreign policy platform of Hamas. The foreign policy platform that Hamas does not recognize Israel's right to exist is very problematic on many levels. Hamas also provided a very attractive set of social services, building hospitals, building schools, distributing food. And for people that live in a reality that's very difficult sometimes, if you have a choice between two parties, one of which that will provide these much-needed social services and one that won't, you are probably going to pick the party that will provide medicine for your grandfather and send your children to school. So the Hamas elections were very complicated and have also complicated the work that we do with OneVoice, because right now there are two authorities. There is Fatah that controls the West Bank and Hamas that controls the Gaza Strip. And at OneVoice we realize that this is a very difficult situation. OneVoice Palestine is working incredibly hard to create a greater sense of unity, and they've been doing several different initiatives in the past year or so. One of their biggest ones was holding public rallies saying that we are one people, one country, one authority, saying that the Palestinian national dream is much more important than any political party. And all across the West Bank and Gaza, we unveiled a series of murals several months ago with a painting of the Palestinian flag and words in Arabic that said, one flag, one army, one people. OneVoice Palestine recognizes that it can't be Fatah versus Hamas. It has to be all the Palestinians committed and working together towards the same goal of achieving their own independent Palestinian state.
Okay. Short of a miracle, what's it going to take for Hamas, to be willing to change its views about the right of Israel to exist?
Actually, several days ago, President Carter met in Damascus with an exiled Hamas leader, Khalid Meshal. And Hamas didn't say outright that it would recognize Israel's right to exist, but it did agree to several very positive things. Hamas said that if Palestine holds a referendum asking all Palestinians whether or not they would like to have their own state, a two-state solution, that is based on the 1967 borders, that is based on having East Jerusalem as the capital of independent Palestine, that Hamas would recognize this will of the people and also work to implement this. So I think a lot more work needs to be done before Hamas is willing to recognize Israel. I think this is a very important goal to work towards. I'm not sure if it will happen in the near future, but at least Hamas is committed to the political process and has said, which we haven't heard yet, that Hamas will also listen to the will of the Palestinian people in crafting its agenda.
Okay. On that note, Laurel Rapp, I want to thank you so much for having been our guest today on Defining Moment.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. If people want to find out more about OneVoice, where can they go?
They can go to our website, 1millionvoices.org.
Okay, great. Thanks once again for having been our guest.
Thank you.
You've been watching The Defining Moment for Creating the Culture of Conscience. You can find us on the internet at www.definingmoment.tv. Thanks for watching and have a great day.